Hi, Yokoso. Uh, my name is Brian Epstein. I am at Modal PLLC. This is session one of the new ExaminIrks series. Um, and the slides have generously been translated by Oshima Yoshitaka-san of Beikoku Patent Lab. Um, the goal of this series is to consider the types of things about which U.S. patent examiners might complain. Uh, the content for this series comes from my experience in prosecuting patent applications at the USPTO and conducting many interviews, hundreds of interviews, and listening to my examiners complain about other attorneys and how we can how U.S. attorneys as a group can improve. Um, so let's go ahead and, whoops, okay. So today's topic is interviews. Um, Many applicants know that interviews efficiently advance prosecution, both in terms of time and money. Um, Typically, the goal is to save an office action and its associated reply. So you would save the U.S. attorney fees in the case of a foreign prosecution, for example, a Japanese prosecution. You might save the fees associated with the Benrishi time. You can also save governmental fees, such as a request for continued examination, an RCE. You could save extensions of time. But what really happens during these interviews? You know, how can we improve? So, our first topic for today is preparing for these interviews. Interviews can be conducted in person. They can be, let me show myself. Sorry, I'm still learning my technology here. This is my first time doing this. Um, the interviews can be, well, they can't be personal during COVID. Uh, Previously, they could be personal. You can do them over telephones, you can do them over video conferences. But the most important thing, of course, is to provide a meaningful interview agenda. A lot of examiners complain to me before we even conduct an interview. To be honest, when I conduct my scheduling call to say, hello, Mr. Examiner, I would like to schedule an interview in 1 week. They frequently ask me to provide a meaningful interview agenda. What does that mean? Um, they want to see enough information. The examiners want to see enough information that they can effectively prepare for the interview. So they want to see a specific claim amendment. They don't necessarily want to see, one claim amendment and five new dependent claims where you can select whichever one you want. They don't want to see, general features discussed, maybe. Don't just say, we propose to discuss the subject matter of figure four. They want to see a meaningful interview agenda that specifically calls out a claim amendment. They want to know your detailed arguments, not just that the new feature is not disclosed in the references, but why isn't it disclosed in the references? What do the references teach that leads, uh, that kind of leads someone to a different conclusion than the amended claim? It would be too strong to say teach away, but typically the art goes in one direction, and then our invention goes in another direction. And so that's what examiners want to see is what's that difference in the structures. Um, one of their complaints frequently is that there is insufficient context for the amendments. You know, why is this the amendment that the applicant is making? If you're changing the claim, what about the prior art changes as a result? And so, one of the things that, you know, I think attorneys, US attorneys, but also Ben Rishi and applicants need to consider is that preparing an effective agenda requires at least an additional 45 minutes. So if you call me up and say, Brian, we want to do an interview, please start preparing. I have to call the examiner first and schedule the interview, but then it's going to take me at least 45 minutes to write the agenda, assuming I know, I'm familiar with the case. It takes a lot of time to do this meaningfully. So, what should I be doing? I should be proposing meaningful amendments, you know, not just kind of functional language or broad language, but something I can really point to during the interview and say, Mr. Examiner, you don't have this feature. Oh, snap. Hey, sorry, I think I totally screwed this whole thing up. Let me start all the way over and we'll try and pick it up quickly. Oh my gosh, I'm so embarrassed. Okay, so Brian Epstein, Modal PLLC. This is session one of ExaminIrks. Um, wow, how terrible. The translations were generously provided by Yoshitaka Oshima-san of Beikoku Patent Lab. Sorry for getting your name reversed. I'm a little flustered because I forgot that I'd be using this microphone. Hopefully everyone can hear me now. We're going to consider the types of things about which examiners might complain. The idea is to draw on my experience. It is to present some of the complaints I've heard from examiners over the last 13 years of interviews, and explain to applicants and Ben Rishi and maybe fellow U.S. representatives, what you can be doing to improve your relationship with your examiners. Today's topic is interviews. Applicants know that interviews efficiently advance prosecution, both in terms of time and money. But what really happens during these interviews? Our goal is to save office actions. It's to avoid RCE fees. Um, it's to avoid potential extensions of time or appeals. What can we do to make the most of our interviews? So the primary thing that we're going to focus on is first preparing for an interview. Examiners often complain that applicant representatives do not provide a meaningful interview agenda. What does this mean? It means that we are trying to provide a meaningful amendment. We're trying to point out where in the specification and drawings the subject matter of the application of the amendment, can be found. We want to see the relevant portions of the prior art. The issue is that typically applicant representatives provide too little information for the examiner to effectively prepare. Examiners only get about 1 hour total for the entire interview process. So they have, about half an hour to review your agenda. They have about half an hour to conduct the interview, and they don't want to spend any more time than that because they're, essentially working off of the clock at that point. And so you want to point out, very specifically, here's my specific claim amendment. This is the specific support for my amendment. Not just some general allegation that it's shown in the original application, but it's on page 16 or it's in figure 5. Um, the examiner wants to know specifically why you're making this amendment. Don't just make some sort of general allegation that the prior art does not teach the amended feature, but instead talk about what the prior art does show. What's kind of similar in the prior art where the prior art eventually goes in one direction and applicant goes in a different direction. That's what we mean by, clearly patentably distinguishing. Um, a common complaint from examiners is that there's insufficient context for the amendments. Like I said, we want to know why you're making this amendment, what is changed by this amendment now that you've, changed the claims. Um, and this process is time consuming. Preparing an effective agenda for an interview requires at least 45 minutes. So if I receive a letter from or an email from a client that says, Brian, please go present an interview. If I already know your application, if I'm familiar with the claims, the invention, the specification, I call up the examiner, I request the interview, you know, I hang up the phone, and then it's still going to take me about 45 minutes to draft a suitable agenda. Um, I want to provide my examiner with all of that information that I discussed. I want to propose meaningful amendments. I want to point to something structural, or if the applicant wants me to present some sort of functional amendment, I want to be prepared to have a structural amendment as a fallback position so that I can make the most of my interview. If there is no meaningful amendment, for example, the applicant wants to present arguments to the examiner, then I want to have some sort of inventiveness story. So in US patent law, we don't really focus on inventive step the way that, for example, Japanese practice does, or the way that European practice does. We focus on obviousness, and the obviousness inquiry focuses on the examiner's combination of references. But that doesn't mean that's what the examiners are looking for. What the examiners are looking for is for the applicants to claim their invention. The examiners want to know that you are pursuing something that they won't be able to find in any combination of references. And so applicant representatives should be prepared to present um, a combination of claim features that really gets towards the inventive step, and they should have some arguments about advantage. And frequently, U.S. attorneys will tell foreign attorneys these kinds of arguments aren't good for written responses, and that's absolutely true. We typically don't want to put these kinds of arguments on the written record. We don't want accused infringers to come back and say, hey, you created prosecution history estoppel. Um, we don't infringe this patent because you argued advantage. The difference with interviews is that, um, you know, the goal is to discuss this office action and these amendments and our arguments without the formality of the written record. This is one of the real powerful pieces of interviews. And so interviews present a golden opportunity for applicants to present exactly this inventiveness story that examiners are looking for, and that applicants aren't providing, properly are not providing in their written remarks. This is your one chance to go to the examiner and say, Mr. Examiner, I am really claiming my invention here. Please look at page 6 where we discuss the problems in the prior art. Please look at page 20 where we discuss the inventive aspects. These correspond to the following um, features that are shown in the figures. Here are the corresponding features in the claims. you know, this is the manner in which your combination of the prior art is deficient. And it's not just that the prior art is deficient, but it's deficient in a particular way. And that particular way is right at the heart of this inventiveness story. All right. So now we come to our second issue, which is conducting the interviews. And so examiners often complain that applicant representatives are not prepared for the interviews. What does that mean? So they will complain that the U.S. attorney does not appear to have read the office action. I will forever remember a particular interview where my examiner told me that he has literally read the office action to an attorney. I don't know why that would ever happen, but that's apparently what happened. Um, Sometimes the examiners complain that the U.S. attorney has not read the prior art, or if you're not going to read the entire prior art document, at least the citations in the office action. Um, I've received complaints from examiners that U.S. attorneys sometimes don't even read their own specification, that the examiners have to explain back to the attorney what it is that their applicant invented. Um, I have no idea about the accuracy of these statements. If, maybe the attorney was playing some sort of strategic game with the examiner, or if the examiner is exaggerating. But I have heard multiple times these kinds of complaints. Um, And so, to kind of tie back into our previous slide, preparing an effective agenda requires reading all of those documents. You have to read the office action. You have to read the prior art, or at least the citations. You have to know your own specification. Um, you need to be familiar with the rejections, that are made in the office action. Not just the prior art and its citations, but how the examiner is interpreting them, how the examiner is applying them. You know, did the examiner in fact provide some sort of prior art, or did the examiner rely on official notice, or selecting a species within a genus? Um, you really need to understand what is the stated basis for the examiner's rejection. That being said, if you attend some of my interviews, I sometimes act folksy with my examiners. Um, you know, I act. It's very difficult to get in front of an examiner and say, "Mr. Examiner, you're wrong." And so, a lot of attorneys, including me, sometimes will act like the examiner is far more familiar with the application than we are. Um, However, there is a limit to that. Specifically, if you do not prepare sufficiently, if your act is incomplete, um, or sorry, the act is incomplete if your examiner is questioning your professionalism. You know, your examiner should not think that you did not read the office action. You have to know if you're going to play this kind of folksy act, you at least need to do the typical amount of preparation, if not more, because your goal is to guide the examiner into, for example, contradicting himself. That's why you have to be friendly and folksy and kind of say, you know, um, "Hey, Mr. Examiner, I really didn't understand this one portion of the office action. If you look at our application, it seems like that's exactly what our background section's doing. And maybe you can help me understand um, what it is that that I don't understand. Help me realize what I don't understand." And it's difficult. It takes a lot of preparation. It takes a lot of familiarity with the legal issues, the claims, the specification, the prior art, because you are trying to not just assert the patentability of something, but you are trying to guide the examiner into not quite a trap, but into realizing the error. It's a much friendlier way of doing it, as opposed to kind of, pounding the table and saying, "Mr. Examiner, you're wrong." Um, Clearly, it's not even the best option. The best option is you send the agenda and the examiner says, "I looked at it. Your argument, your amendments are meaningful. Your arguments are persuasive. This will require further search and consideration." That would be the ideal. It definitely happens sometimes, but far less frequently than I think U.S. attorneys or foreign attorneys or applicants think. I would say it happens maybe 20%, 20% at best if you have very structural subject matter, like some sort of mechanical invention. If you have a softer invention like a software program or something where it's more difficult to structurally claim the elements, particularly when you are trying to follow the instructions of a foreign applicant. In that case, you know, it's going to be a little bit more difficult, and the examiners are just not going to accept your arguments as frequently as examiners in other technology centers. So, I appreciate your time. I appreciate your sticking with me through the technical problems. We had some problems in the original URL. Obviously, I forgot my headphones and microphone early on. Um, this is a work in progress. Hopefully, the second session will be a lot better. I'm hoping to bring in Oshima-san so that um, he can provide translation as I speak. And maybe we can get some questions going. So again, thank you very much. Uh, we'll see you in 2 weeks. Thanks for your time.